So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's call. I am Sankalp and I take care of business development at PMSCIF World. PMSCIF World is India's leading and one of the most trusted and only, uh, you know, uh, thought-based and content and analytics-based digital wealth management platform. And we've been doing a lot of educational, series for investors and our audience in general. And the point of a lot of these are introducing new thoughts, new topics, new perspectives into investing and looking at portfolios in a different angle and a more thought-based approach. So in that context, today we have a set of very special guests with us. Okay, we have the team from IIFL Wealth and Asset Management. So I'll introduce the lady first. Shashi Singh. So she's a senior partner with IIFL AMC, and she has an experience of 23 years in the financial services industry. She's worked with marquee asset management names like Reliance, ICICI Pru, and Religare Global Asset Management before taking the charge at IIFL Asset Management. Next up, we have Mr. Shishir Bajpai, who is the Executive Vice President at IIFL Asset Management. He's a veteran, comes with a similar vintage of experience of close to 2 decades, and has been, associated with marquee names like Morgan Stanley and Kotak Securities. And now to one of our, the third guest, and the most special guest I would say today is, Parijat Garg. So he is an computer science engineer as well as a CFA. So that's a lot about his, uh, you know, ev- you know, uh, his evolved character, I would say, and very few people can claim to be both an IIT and as well as a CFA. So he's done a lot of interesting work. He has been a high frequency trader for US equities as well as a high frequency trader in the domestic markets. And right now he is managing the quant investing bit at for IIFL, and we will hear from him more today. And without keeping all the audience waiting, I will hand over to Sashiji. Before that, let me just give you guys the statistics. I just ran a poll, which the question was, I can say I know what in quant investing is. Only 34% said yes, and 65% said they can't. They know what quant investing is. So the team today has some work to do, and I hope at the end of it we all come out a bit wiser and more knowledgeable. So over to you, Sashi.
I should say we should run a poll after this session, and of course this is a 2-series session, so after the second series definitely run a session. Good evening everyone, and a warm welcome to this special edition of PMSCIF World educational webinars that they've been doing very diligently. Just to take a few minutes and tell you that at IIFL Asset Management, we're not a traditional mutual fund company, and we take pride in saying that we are trying to bring differentiated products in the market, which are not available for various reasons and are the need of the market. So today, if you see, one of the things that we say for a fund's performance or underperformance, and many times we keep hearing this in the circles, that the fund manager was emotional about the stock, and he did not sell it when he had to sell it, or he did not buy it when he had to buy it, because there's a human involvement there. And we have evolved and smart mathematicians like our Parijat, who have helped us tide over this. In this session today, we will only focus on what is quant investing, where are we today in India on quant investing, and where is the world headed with this kind of investments. I'm sure all of you in your respective segments have heard that slowly we're moving towards machine-based investing. A lot of things have aided to that. Data has become better, smarter kids have come on the block, and there are different ways of doing research. There's a lot of data available now because of the number of years of the listed market in India also. So I'll hand it over over to Parijat to talk about quant investing. What is quants? A very basic series. During the chat, he'll have some questions to ask you, which will be run through the poll, and we'll request you all to please participate. That will help us understand you better and make him help you understand better. So over to you, Parijat.
Thank you, Shashi. I think you set me up with a challenging task because of just starting from scratch to explain quant investing. But I think it's an interesting exercise, and for that reason, that since so few people seem to know what it is, but it's becoming an important part of how assets are now managed globally. So I'm hoping that this actually changes something on the ground. Sankalp, could you put up the presentation?
Just allow me 1 second. I think the presentation is starting.
Okay. So so many people said that they don't know what quant investing is. They wouldn't be able to say, but I'm actually going to make a claim that, in fact, you are very familiar with at least one quant product. In fact, it's a product that you talk about. If you're at all active in the markets, you probably talk about it at least once a day. You look at its performance at least once a day, and practically any equity investments that you do, you probably benchmark and compare it against that product, and it's a quant product, right? So, just given what I've just said, I would like to Sankalp, if you could just so you could just type, if you think you know what I'm talking about, which product, which quant product am I talking about, that most people or almost everybody is actually quite familiar with. You can use the chat box to type some answers. I'll wait for a few seconds.
Yeah, so what Parijat is asking is, what is the best known quant investment product that you are aware of? Please type the name on the chat box.
Yeah, so let's see if we have some answers. So
and
Ramesh,
just to give some hint, if I may add to what Parijat is asking, it's a name. If you are in the equity market, you use it in every sentence probably, because the equity market cannot be defined by you without using that word. So just to give you guys some hint to guess Parijat's question.
Yeah, we've got some answers. So few of them have guessed. Mr. Ramesh has guessed Sensex. Mr. Manu Rathi has guessed Nifty 50. Sharad Gupta Index Fund. Sajjan Gupta ji Quant MF likhe hai. And Sanjay Pradhan has written Nifty and Sensex. So are these guys somewhere around close, Parijat?
Yes, absolutely. So this is exactly the same. It's lovely to see that it's clear to people that Nifty itself is a quant product. That's the amazing thing, and I will explain how. And to explain that, we first need to understand what quant investing is, right? In a very small definition, it's a simple thing. It can sound very complex, but it's very simple. Anything which is an objective, rules-based system to pick stocks and to build portfolios, you can say that's quant investing, right? So it does not necessarily have to be very mathematical, very fancy, or it has to use artificial intelligence. Nothing like that. Anything that is objective. This is very important, right? You can have a strategy which says, it can be rule-based, and the rule can simply say that buy the cheap stocks in the market, or that is a rules-based system. But that's not objective, because how you are defining what something, what you would call something is cheap, that is a very subjective process, which we do every day. So the important keyword here is also objective. So if you have an objective rules-based system to choose what stocks to buy and what percentage of them to put in your portfolio, that's simply what a quant investing strategy is, right? So if you take that definition and you look at Nifty, for example, then these are the rules. You calculate the market cap of all the stocks in the market, right? You sort them from largest to smallest, and then you pick the top 50. So that's your stock selection. And then next, how much do you buy? You buy them in the proportion to their market cap, right? You do this and you've got Nifty. And since Nifty is following these rules, since this is objective, nobody has to apply their mind and say, "Nay, maybe we should not put this stock in the index, etc." It's a quant product. It qualifies as a quant investing product. And in some ways, it's actually a special kind of quant investment product. I mean, there can be hundreds of thousands of products. Nifty or Sensex or BSE 500, there's actually a very special thing about this strategy which sets it apart, and which is why people use it as a benchmark. So if you look at this lovely looking red velvet cake, right? The slice that you've taken out, that's like your investment in a BSE 500 or a Sensex. Basically, you're taking an exact proportion from the entire market. You're taking an equal slice across everything in the market, and so that you get a representation of the entire market. Right now, in the case of a cake, right? For example, everybody cuts it out, they will get, their slice will look very much like yours. But in the, like in the case of a cake as well, if you are even as old as I am, I'm sure you've had an occasion where you took the slice and then you removed all the cream from top of it, and then you ate the rest, right? So you don't necessarily want the entire representation of the cake. You just want some part of it. Or say if you have kids, if you've got a 3-year-old at home, it's completely possible that she will just eat the cream and she will not eat the cake. Right? So that exact same sort of thing you can also do with the markets. So Nifty, Sensex, etc., they look like this specific slice. But there are quant strategies, or you can build quant strategies that can slice up this cake in different ways. Right? Now this is, I know this is extremely abstract, so obviously we'll get into specifics and we'll talk about the market and stop talking about cake. So, how else could you cut up the market cake? So one way is you just take a proportionate position in all the stocks. So the largest stocks will be the largest weight in your portfolio, and so on and so forth. That's how Nifty and Sensex are made up. But how else could you cut it up? And the answer to that question is, there are lots of ways that, again, you already know about, right? So if you are you are a slightly higher risk investor and you think the economy is in a cyclical upturn, you might actually buy mid caps. Right? So there you are dividing up the market by market cap, and you think I want to buy mid caps. Or you are a conservative investor investing for the long term, then you might say I just want to buy large caps. Now, if you're slightly more savvy and you think, okay, I think the market is looking risky right now because of COVID, etc., let me buy defensive stocks. But defensive is a slightly harder to define term. Right? Mid caps are very straightforward. SEBI will also give you a definition, or AMFI will give you a definition. Defensives is a more tricky thing to define. You have some feeling when you say defensive stocks. You might think FMCG, you might think pharma. But to a quant investor, that's not a good enough definition, right? So remember how we said that quant investing is objective and rules-based. So the rule might be buy defensive stocks, but if you want to have a good definition of it, right? If you want to be objective about it, you need a proper mathematical definition. And a quant investor will insist upon that. You cannot have a quant strategy without exactly defining what you mean by defensive, right? So at IIFL, we have a particular framework, for example, for defining what a defensive stock is. And in fact, we cut up the entire market into these 4 different categories. Our CIO, Mr. Anup Maheshwari, actually spoke about this a few weeks ago on this platform itself. And you should go through that video to understand it in greater detail. But just broadly speaking, we say that, we will say that a stock is defensive if the return on equity that the stock has delivered for 6 out of the 10 years is greater than 15 years. So at least for 6 years out of the last 10 years, if it has given an ROE of greater than 15%, then the stock will be considered as a defensive stock. So now notice here that there is no subjectivity involved here. It doesn't matter who is running this calculation, right? You could take this formula, you could put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and you could put the financial history of a stock into Excel, and it will tell you that, okay, whether this stock will be considered a defensive stock or not. So nobody has to come and apply their mind and take a subjective call whether something is a defensive stock. Similarly, for secular growth companies, what we call secular growth companies are companies that have delivered not only on the equity, the return on equity, but also on the PAT growth. So if the earnings have grown by more than 15% in at least 6 out of the 10 years, last 10 years, then we would say that it's a secular growth company. So this is just a framework. Again, it doesn't matter the specific number, 15% is not the point. You can have your own definition. But the important point is that we have an objective mathematical definition of what we are going to call something as a defensive stock or a secular stock. Now, what is the upside to doing this? You've done this. The benefit is the moment you've broken up these stocks into these categories and you've done it in an objective way, like note the word objective, you can actually run what is known as a back test, right? You can say, okay, if I were to invest in secular growth companies and if I had been doing it for the last 15 years, would I have made money? Right? So normally the way people answer this question is they will give you examples. They will say, look, there was this great company that for the last 15 years has done great ROE and great growth, and see what the stock price has done. It actually, you made like 25% per annum buying that stock or things like that. So they will give you certain examples. But what happens in that process is that they will forget the companies that seem to be high growth companies and that did not perform, right? And they will not cite that example, and you will also not think about them. And so we get a distorted view. We seem to think that certain types of companies do well, but it is completely possible that we've not looked at the correct examples, right? Because there is a subjective decision that is taking place on what is a growth company. But the moment you've defined it mathematically, then what you can do is, okay, you can go back to the database in 2006, look at the financials of the companies back in 2006. And by formula, look at the entire 500 BSE 500 companies, and you can say, okay, I've applied the formula. Out of these 500, here are the 120 companies that qualified. And now I invested in those companies, in all of them, not just the selected names that you remember. And then you can see the performance. So when you do something like that, you can be much surer that your hypothesis that investing in secular growth companies is a good idea is actually borne out by history. And it is not distorted by your feeling about a company. I'll give you an example. Satyam Computers, right? So today we might, if you were to ask, would you have bought Satyam Computers back in 2008 or 2007? You might think, it was a fraud company. Why would I have invested? But the fact of the matter remains that in 2007, nobody knew that. In fact, even 3 months before the fraud broke open, they actually won the Golden Peacock Award for corporate governance. But it's now in hindsight, you will not remember all of that, and you will think, Satyam was always a suspect case. Maybe it was not that great a company, and so I would not have bought it. But when you do backtesting like this, when you've got an objective criteria, all of that will be taken care of. And despite all of that bad performance, you might find, this strategy actually works. So even if something goes wrong, it works. You don't have to find just the good examples to promote your strategy. And more importantly, not to fool yourself as well, that certain things work. So here, for example, in this chart, what you'll see is the top line, the highest performance is coming from stocks that have in the secular growth category. Then the second is the defensives. So where the growth is not there, but they have great ROE. And then the cyclicals, and finally the value traps. Now, in fact, this is something that drives our investing philosophy, even in our discretionary investing process. So as a team, we manage discretionary funds as well. And we realize that secular growth companies on average tend to do better than everybody else, than the other companies. So we tend to keep an overweight on secular. So that's okay, that's great. All of this information is useful for a discretionary investor. What does it mean for a quant investor? Right? So from a quant investing perspective, to drive that point home, I will just ask this question. And Sankalp, if you could put up this poll.
Right. Let's just put up the poll.
Right.
Again, just to give you everyone a hint to get a sense of what Parijat is asking, that all the BSE 200 companies companies which have a long history of ROE and strong profit growth, right? Which one typically do you pick? Given as he explained through our biases, we tend to get some examples which typically come in your mind. But the real answer when you do a quant might be very different. So just giving you a sense before you start guessing it.
So
Yeah.
guys,
So
the poll is live. If we're getting an answers, let's give it another
question. So just to frame the question even more clearly, on the bag on the left, you've got all the BSE 200 companies. And on the right, you just have companies that have a long history of ROE growth and strong profit growth. And now you have to pick a bag, and you're allowed to put your hand into the bag and pull out one company, right? And that company you have to hold for the next 1 year, right? And you're allowed to choose which bag you are going to pick your company from. Then which is the one that you would rather pick? Right, so I see, again, this is nice. You've got, I think, we got 87% people picking the bag on the right. So this is fantastic. And this is the intuitively right thing to do as well, given what we saw. That, on average, so there will obviously be some companies that have a history of long growth and high ROE. Some of them might still go bust. And some of them might collapse and the management might go bad. But on average, the companies in this right-hand side bag will actually be doing better than the ones on the left. So this is exactly what the quant investor latches onto, right? So the first thing was you objectively define what a defensive stock is, what a secular stock is, and you run a backtest. Once you've run a backtest and you see that there is this one particular category of stocks that does extremely well, then you say, okay, now I'm going to systematically bet only on those category of stocks. So, for example, a quant strategy that wants to cut up the market in this SCDV framework might say, okay, I'm going to only buy stocks from the S category. Or let's say, because even the defensive category is good, I will buy stocks only in the secular growth and the defensive category, and I will not buy stocks from the other category. So that's the takeaway. You backtest because you've done objective testing of an idea, objective definition, and then you've tested how it performs in the past, then you can, with far greater confidence, you can pick stocks from that category and build your portfolio. Okay. Now, so these are two aspects so far. And there's one very important aspect, and that's true for all kinds of investing and obviously applies equally to quant investing also, is the question of risk. Okay. So again, consider this. I'll change the setup a little. Let's say, we've been hearing a lot about this, value investing, let's say, cheap stocks. So there is a lot of Warren Buffett, and there's a long history in saying that if you buy cheap stocks, you tend to do better, right? Buying cheap stocks is a good strategy. So just as we saw, buying secular growth companies is a good strategy. It's been seen over many, many decades that buying cheap stocks is a good strategy. So you could do something like that. You could say, okay, I'm just going to buy stocks with the cheapest price to book ratio, right? You could do that. What will end up happening is in your portfolio, it's very likely that you will have practically no FMCG companies, because typically in India, FMCG companies tend to trade at high price to book and high price to earnings multiples. So your entire portfolio will be skewed maybe towards metals and mining stocks and utilities. There might be great companies there, but your portfolio will be extremely lopsided, right? So the individual bets might be good, but on a portfolio basis, you don't have adequate risk control in terms of what sectors you are exposed to. So that, at some point it might happen that only FMCG companies are doing well and your cheap stocks are actually continuing to do badly. So you want to manage that risk. And in quant strategies, that also is actually a very well-defined process, and it can be done extremely well. So let's see what happens in a discretionary process. If there is a fund manager, for example, who likes to, who has this bias, who likes to buy cheap stocks, and it's very well known in the industry also. There are some in the fund managers who like to buy cheap stocks. There are others who buy what are known as quality stocks, etc. So there are known biases. So it can easily happen that their portfolios can become lopsided. But in a quant strategy, what we can do is look, because quant strategies don't get emotional, right? They don't get attached to a stock. They don't get attached to an idea. So you can put it objectively into your strategy and say, look, no matter what you do, we want to make sure that we are never more than 5% plus or minus, 5% plus or minus in any given industry. So even if you can't find very cheap stocks in FMCG, you make sure you buy the cheapest so that you get to at least say 3%, 4%, 5% weight in that particular category in my portfolio, right? So you can build in the risk management into the strategy instead of putting it as an external construct, which often happens in discretionary investing. Another thing you could do is, for example, control for liquidity risk. Now that's again a tricky thing subjectively, but in a quant strategy, you could just add liquidity constraints, and you could say, look, you can never buy more than a certain daily traded volume of a given security, etc. So you can put in all sorts of risk measures right into your strategy, and that's a crucial part of any quant strategy. Right? That without that, it's not really a complete strategy. So you have these three pieces. To summarize, you have these three pieces. You first objectively define a characteristic that you are going after. So you could be going after growth, you could be going after quality, you could be going after value, you could be going after momentum. There are any number of different things that you could define and say, I want to buy high quality companies, right? So you objectively define what that means instead of just hand waving and you say, oh, Asian Paints is a high quality company, or Hindustan Lever is a high quality company. Or, a quant would then say, no, I'm saying that only companies with return on equity of greater than 20%, only those I will call quality companies. So that objective definition is the first step in quant investing. Then you actually backtest the idea. Is it, you might want to buy quality companies and it might make sense to you that you should buy quality companies, but does that actually generate returns over the long term? And if you don't have quant processes, the only way to find out is actually start investing, right? So you'll invest in these companies, you'll wait for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, and then you'll begin to understand, oh, it makes sense to invest in quality companies, or no, maybe it's not that great an idea to invest in certain types of companies. But in quant investing, because you have an objective definition, you can backtest. So you have the luxury of using history to test the ideas instead of spending 5, 7, 8 years of your life trying to learn whether something works or does not work. So that's the second element. And third, there is explicit risk management built into a good quant strategy that makes sure you don't blow up if things go south in the market. You can still remain reasonably safe. So these are the three elements. And how that translates into an actual working process for developing a strategy is, again, actually, I've been saying that again and again. So you start with a hypothesis. Your hypothesis could be investing in growth companies actually outperforms the market. That's your hypothesis. Then you objectively define what you mean by a growth company. You say any company that has grown more than 10% PAT over the last 6 years out of 10, that is what I will call a growth company. You can backtest that hypothesis. And if it is true, you build a risk management portfolio. So this risk managed portfolio. So this is how any quant strategy actually comes to life over time. I'll take a very straightforward example just to make it more concrete. This is a very well-known strategy. Actually, it was proposed sometime in 2006 or 7. So you want to buy cheap quality companies. You want to buy companies with fairly good quality business, and you want to buy it at a reasonably low price. How could you do it if you wanted to do it? And you could actually do it on Screener.in actually on your own. All you have to do is the following: you take all the stocks and you rank them based on their price to book ratio. You rank them so that the lowest price to book ratio is ranked the highest. So you record these ranks, and you can do this in Excel. So you export the data from Screener and you just put one column price to book, one column ROE. You rank it on price to book in one column. Then another column you rank these stocks based on ROE, so that the highest ROE has the highest rank. And then you add these two ranks, you'll get another composite rank. And then you sort this list by this rank and you pick the 30 stocks with the highest ranks. And you build a portfolio based on this. This is a perfectly legitimate quant strategy. And it actually seems to have worked in the past. So you could try this if you want to, do it yourself kind of. If you're a do-it-yourself kind of person, you could actually try this. And the good thing is we can actually backtest this and see if it works. So it's not like you have to try it and see for 5 years whether you're making money with this strategy. You can just backtest. and have a reasonable amount of comfort that it will work. Okay, so what other kind of things are used? What characteristics? So like we said, there's defensives and seculars, and you will also have heard rate sensitives and forex sensitive kind of stocks. But there is an entire category that is used worldwide, and I will talk about this more next time. But there is something that the industry calls factors, and these factors are the terms that you see here: quality, and there are some fund managers who talk a lot about quality stocks, right? But it's unclear when you talk to them exactly how you would decide whether a given company is a quality company or not. So it's a lot of it is intuition and some basic rules of thumb. But to a quant investor, quality can be defined, usually, and this will vary by from a fund manager to fund manager. But they will usually take a combination of the ROE in the business, what the gross margins are like, what the leverage is like, what the growth is like, and they can mathematically combine this to come up with a quality score. Similarly, value. What is a cheap stock? Some people will tell you, a low price to earnings is cheap. Somebody might say low price to book is cheap. Or somebody might say, dividend yield, I'm getting 5% dividend yield, the stock is cheap. So what quant allows you to do is you can take actually all of these measures, and you can think of other interesting ways also to say whether something is cheap. And you can combine these to come up with a value score. Similarly in momentum. So instead of thinking of stocks in terms of industries or market caps, you can start thinking of companies in terms of their characteristics of value, of quality, etc. And you can then actually invest in those kinds of companies. And this has also a lot to do with investor preference. And you might be the kind of person who just who wants to buy, high quality businesses and that's it, and forget about them for 10 years. And then there are others who have this feeling that, you want to buy things for, you want something worth 1 rupee for 50 paisa. If you can get that, that's going to get a great return. In investing, that's a fair thing to do. So depending on your personality and your portfolio needs, which again we'll talk about next time, you can actually start using quant. You can build portfolios to target these specific qualities instead of just having to build a portfolio based on, I'm going to buy a pharma fund and I'm going to buy a real estate fund. So I noticed quite a few people have also invested in thematic funds, maybe based on what you are targeting, or not necessarily in the industry, but that particular characteristic. So quant actually allows you to do these things as well. So there is, so these are things, this is stuff that is true. And then there is this whole notion, lots of different notions about quant investing that people will tell you, so one thing that really a lot of people will tell you is, these quant strategies, they only work in backtests. This is like, 15 years, it's fine. And the moment I'm going to invest, this will stop working. Now, this can certainly happen. But most of the time it happens is when the people who are marketing the fund, who've built the fund, have not actually stuck to the rigors and the correct way of doing things in the hope of getting a strategy, right? And there are lots of biases. And again, we'll talk about it next time in how do you assess whether a given strategy, when a fund is brought to you and say, look, this is the process that we use to pick stocks, how do you check and what questions do you ask and what do you think to figure out that this is likely to work or not likely to work in the first place? I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say somebody says, there are two different funds. One fund says, my fund, I buy stocks that are less than 10 times price to earnings. And I have found that over the last 10, 15 years, just doing that is a good idea and it makes money. And there's another person who comes to you with a fund, sir, my strategy actually looks at price to earnings. And I have found that if you buy a stock below 12.7 times price to earnings, but if the promoter is based only in these 4 cities, then the performance is great. Right? If I gave you these 2 strategies, intuitively you would feel the second guy is like, maybe it worked in the past. There's no guarantee that this is good. It's far too complex. And it's probably not going to work. So we'll talk about this in the future, in the next week's conversation. But only works in backtests is not really true. In the US, there are fund management companies that manage hundreds of billions of dollars on quant strategies. They've been around for 30, 40 years now, and they've done well. So it's not like it doesn't work. It's just that it needs to have mathematical rigor, and it has to be done properly, and then things work fine. Another one is that it's extremely complicated, right? There is some fancy magic that is going on, and there's artificial intelligence, etc. But as we've seen, there is absolutely no reason why very simple strategies. I just showed you. Buy companies with ROEs of more than 15% and growth more than 15% over the last, in the last 10 years. And it works, and that's simple, and there's no complexity in that model. There is obviously operational challenges. There is obviously psychology in making sure you stay invested, etc. But the strategy works. It's perfectly a good strategy without any complexity. Built by engineers. Yes, I'm an engineer, but with no understanding of markets. It's obviously some people can try, but I think eventually the products that are built with a combination of deep understanding. So example, again, our team. So I work very closely with the discretionary investing team, which has a very long investing history. Our CIO has been investing for the last, managing funds for the last 25 years. So, and we learn from them and we get inputs from them. And when that feeds into your quant investing process, that's when you get actually really great products, and it can be done. So there's not a, so these are all myths. They can apply to a certain subset of the market. There are all sorts of people selling all kinds of products. And obviously you learn to identify which ones are actually fine and which ones are just not going to work. And now talking about not going to work, why does it work in the first place? Right? I mean, we've tried to reduce, we've got analyst teams who talk to companies and they spend so much time understanding industries. And here we are trying to say that, look, all you have to do is buy companies with high ROE and high growth. Why does that work in the first place? How can you make money by doing just something that simple? And there are multiple reasons for that. One big one is behavioral biases. So for example, what happened in April or March last year was that, a lot of people just froze. They could see that the market was down and it was probably a very good time to deploy capital, but people froze. There was a lot of fear. The point about quant is there's no fear. It's a system. It doesn't know fear. It doesn't know greed. If its signals say that you should buy this stock, you go ahead and buy that stock subject to risk controls that are also pre-built in. So, and similarly, when the market is rising, it's gone crazy. People don't tend to sell, but a quant strategy will sell if it thinks that something has become too expensive. Then there's no greed when that happens. That itself adds a phenomenal amount of advantage over the market. Another thing is compounding learning. So I heard a statistic, I think very recently, that the number of fund managers in India with more than 10 years of history is probably like a handful of them, like maybe a dozen or a couple of dozen people. That's it. Right? So imagine every time there's a new fund manager, he could have been learning from mentors, but that learning has to happen from scratch every time there's a new fund manager in the industry. But in quant, what happens is this learning just compounds because somebody thought of a great idea. You write it up, you write a code or a program, and it's there, it's right there. So when the next person comes along, he can refine that idea and take it further. And this body of knowledge keeps growing and it keeps getting better. How do you adjust earnings? How do you adjust book value? How do you build a good portfolio? What sort of risks are there? You don't have to, no human has to come and learn all of this from scratch. It gets built into the system. And that compounding, just like compounding of money, compounding of learning also is extremely powerful and makes these systems better over time. And that's also the same point about institutional memory. So people can come and go, but since the system lives in the organization and the learning actually is objectively in the organization, this performance can constantly improve. And finally, there is, you can objectively backtest. So it's not like you try out an idea and then 3 years later you realize it doesn't work, then you will change gears, you'll do something else. Here you can objectively backtest. So on day one, you can be doing the right thing for your portfolio. And all of this adds up to performance that discretionary processes make up for in other ways. To be honest, they make it up by finding out more about industries and making predictions. And quant strategies can give up all of that because they bring the alpha or they bring the performance based on these advantages that they have. And finally, I think being an engineer or whatever, I have a bias to keep thinking about risks. I think as investors, we all should first think about risks. There are some risks to quant strategies, all of them which can be mitigated and protected against. One is overfitting. Like I said, this is actually the mirror image of the problem that the strategies only work in backtests. The reason they only work in backtests for a lot of people is because they do something known as overfitting. I will talk a little about it next time in terms of how do you identify whether something has been overfitted. But I did speak about the example, right, where one fund manager is saying, okay, if price to earnings is less than 10, I will invest, versus somebody who says price to earnings of 12.75 or something, right? So something that's usually a sign of overfitting in the strategy backtesting. The second one is a dangerous one. Regime changes. What does that mean? And this is something we keep saying, right, in the industry. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. The thing about that is that sometimes the world does change. Very often it doesn't, but sometimes it does change. And you have to find out whether where you backtested it, where your strategy worked at a certain time, whether the world is now very different. Most of the time it doesn't happen, but at some level that discretion is required, that fund managers can think about this, wealth advisors can think about it. You as an investor can also think about whether regime changes have taken place. But again, if a strategy is based on a very simple idea, like buying cheap stocks, then the chances that regime change is a huge problem is unlikely. And finally, there is operational errors. Operational errors exist everywhere. In quant strategies, these operational errors are related to how data is handled and whether the portfolio is executed well, etc. These are things that mature organizations, it's not that much of a problem. As an industry in India, since we are in early stages, these are things that that might be an issue, but they are getting smoothed out very quickly. But you have to be aware that when you're investing with an organization, whether they have the operational capability as well to manage quant strategies, because the management of quant strategies is quite different from discretionary strategies, the infrastructure, etc. That's a risk, but that's again something that can be mitigated by just looking at the profile of the fund management house that's running these strategies. So that's it. That's what I have for this time. Next time we will talk about, this was all theory, this is all nice and good. Obviously, the question you probably have in mind is, what kind of returns can I expect? Should I be investing? What strategy should I invest in? How do I decide whether a specific strategy is good? All of these things we will be talking about next time. For now, I'm happy to take any questions.
Sankalp, I think so you're on mute.
Sorry. I think that's the most common faux pas everybody's making these days. So before we move into Q&A, if Shashi or Shishir, if you guys want to contribute anything, most welcome, and then we'll move to Q&A.
Sure.
So while we compile the questions, I just want to say that in this first part of the two-part series that Parijat has been painstakingly trying to do is to explain what is quant strategy in a very simplistic manner. And I would only request all the participants to please come in and join on 23rd April again, which is the more interesting part, that while all of us agree that with the advent of AI, machine learning, mathematics, we've all realized that if we have to get precision, it has to be methodical, has to be statistics driven, process driven, methods driven, and that's what quant investing brings in. But just like you have so many mutual funds, how to select within the quants, what are the parameters selected? How does a fund manager or a team goes about building a quant model? What goes behind that? Because whatever is the data put in the quant is what is the result will come. This will be explained more in detail by Parijat in the next session.
Right. So, Shishir, got anything to say?
Yeah, sure. So just to put what Parijat has just explained in detail in these presentations. So if I go back, because there's always a old school thought and a new school thought which keeps happening,
Right.
wherein you have the old style of investing and the modern style of investing. And these two keeps debating. So there will always a conflict that whether this really helps or not, or does add value or not. So even that was my view when I've been interacting with other quants and even with Parijat. So somewhere in my conversation with him, we realized that, and correct me, Parijat, if I'm wrong, that the analysis and everything fundamental, whatever we have been doing, it's all mathematical ultimately. Now, how we are using that information and how we are building the portfolio is something which the fund manager, the fund team is really analyzing and putting into perspective. Right. But the numbering game and everything analysis still goes on to it. So definitely there's a process through which you are coming to a conclusion that this is what derives and this is the methodology that I'm using. Here, we are taking this a one step further. So not just analyzing the companies by using these numbers, but further taking it even in terms of constructing the portfolio, that how we can have a much more defined portfolio and the way we are using our knowledge to build the mathematical things for getting the analysis on the companies, even for the portfolio thing. So you're just taking it one step further and building it. And that's what it really tries to enhance everything and tries to fill in the gaps. It's not just somebody's own thought process, but a multitude. And as Parijat rightly said, it's not something who can be disconnected from the market, because ultimately the program is written by us only. So what we are looking for ultimately from the portfolio is clearly defined. So somewhere it's the combination of the old school thought and the new school thought, and that's how the portfolio really emerges and allow us to maybe remove some of these things to get a better enhanced return and experience over the longer period of time. So this is just wanted to sum up what Parijat has just added.
You're exactly right, Shishir. So, the idea is there is a lot in any investing process, in a discretionary investing process, there's a lot that is quite quantitative, where people look at price to earnings ratios and ROEs and growths, etc. And then there is subjective. The idea is in quant is to take more and more of that subjective thing and, try and quantify. Just, okay, nail down. What do you mean by a quality company? What do you mean by a growth company? What do you mean by high ROE? How much is a high ROE, etc. You nail that down, the more of it you can quantify, and then just based on that, you want to try and invest. So as we interact more and as we develop the tools to capture more and more of this subjectivity and turn it into objectivity, the quant process also gets better. And in turn, by the way, the outputs from quant systems is used by the discretionary investing teams as well. So they can then focus on their, the objective parts are taken care of, and they can focus on thinking more clearly about what a machine cannot do. Right. So that way, these two pieces actually enhance each other as well.
Right. So thank you guys for that. So now we'll take a couple of questions. So, while we were doing the session, one of my, investor just, WhatsApp me this question. Okay. So he says that in this, form of investing, the backbone of this structure is the thought process you put into the metrics or parameters which Shashi mentioned. Okay. And I also understand there's another part to it. So if you think that this answering this will, let the mystery go away, make the mystery go away. So you can just, somewhere skim your answer a bit. So the question is how do you fix a parameter for situations that are yet to come? Okay. So since a lot of it is on back-tested data, okay, or data that has already played out. Okay, but markets, if you look at just the last 3-4 years, there was a Brexit, there was a ILFS, there was Pulwama, there was COVID. There's so many things, other things. Okay, so how does a quant model typically looking at past data invest or select stocks for the future? So if you just can answer that.
This is a fantastic question, and we have no intention of actually trying to hide much. There is some secret sauce in what we do, but most of these ideas actually it's okay to discuss. In fact, that's how they get better. So this question is actually very pertinent to the point I made about regime change, right? So
right.
what you're talking about though is about events. So it is completely possible that during those short periods, like all other strategies, a quant strategy might also suffer. But the idea for backtest is, for example, let me just say the quantitative value investing strategy in the US is actually tested back up to, I think, 1928 or something. Right? So they've looked at performance of this. If you had been doing this since 1928, it has gone through the Great Depression. It has seen World War II. It has seen the entire Cold War, the Korean War, the Afghanistan War, all of that. And it has worked. And now it's completely possible that during those short periods of time or for a few years, even that strategy might have suffered. But like all equity investing, the idea is that you stay invested for long periods of time. You can't hope to make, just because you're doing a quant strategy, you're not going to make a straight line FD-like return. It's still an equity investing strategy. It still has to be held for a decently long period of time. But if the fundamental ideas are not really dependent on, and they're not affected, if it is a well-constructed strategy, you're not trying to forecast events. You're trying to bet on things that persist over time. If you get my drift, you're not trying to bet that I will be able to tell when the market is going to crash. No, you are trying to bet on a fundamental idea that ultimately high quality companies perform over a 5-7 year period. It's just that I want to objectively be able to buy it and not get scared out of my positions. That's another important thing, that I will not get scared out of my positions. The quant strategy will not just dump everything. So that is where you add alpha. You're not necessarily trying to predict the next catastrophe, but you're trying to bet on the fundamentally sound ideas for the long run.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that answer. That was crisp. And the next question that I'll ask you is, a lot of times, this you spoke about one of your myths also. A lot of times quant becomes very associated with what is, in other words, called momentum. Okay. That's like the common association, people make with respect to quant strategies. So how do you think, can you just tell us out there before we, for process and we discuss further, concepts from quant investing per se, just demarcate them, because I can now understand that they can be entirely different thing, because you can hold a stock or as long as or for as less time as you wish, depending upon your defined parameters. So how do you differentiate distinctly between these two things?
Okay, so I want to say two things. First of all, somehow momentum is a bad word for investors. It shouldn't be. There is sufficient evidence to show that investing in momentum stocks actually does well for your portfolio. And there's not a cynical thing. The reason is there are strong reasons grounded in economics of why momentum stocks work. It's because the markets tend to underestimate when a company turns around and starts doing well. The market does not react quickly enough. That is one of the reasons why momentum works. So momentum is not a bad word. And yes, a lot of quant strategies are momentum-based strategies. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It may or may not be your style, but it's actually a valid strategy. As for, I think you're talking about demarcation between holding period, etc. Let me tell you, I have come from, like you mentioned in the start, I come from a high frequency trading background. And what high frequency means is that typically, the holding time for most of our strategies was anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes.
Right.
That is what high frequency looks like. And there are people who would even say a 3-month holding period is you're holding for 3 months. That means you're trading. If you are buying for anything less than 3 years, that's trading. That's not really investing. So I think it's irrelevant. At least from a quant perspective, it's not really a relevant question on whether this is trading or investing. Right? What matters is whether the idea is fundamentally sound, whether it works in backtests, whether you've not overfitted and you're not doing some statistical jugglery in the whole thing, whether you can control transaction costs, whether it is tax efficient. Those are the questions. Really trying to say that this is an investing strategy or this is a trading strategy, it's not really, it's a moot idea. I like to say quant investing just so that people, because when I say quant trading, Or if I were to say quant trading, people tend to think of 3-day and 4-day and technical charts, etc. So when you say investing, there is just that mindset that we are talking about building portfolios. But other than that, I don't think there is any functional difference.
Right. So so my next question, I would want Shashi or Shishir, either of you guys to take. So IIFL Asset Management is known for creating niche kind of products. Okay, so far you guys have built a very good name, managing money in the multi-cap space. Okay, and quant investing is probably going to be one of the big things or one of the next big things in the investing space. How do you look at this bit, and what is your idea or what is your intention of looking at this niche space? So any one of you can probably help us with this.
Yeah, see, if we go back in history, and I have seen the whole quant investing fail some 15 years back, and we've seen quant models coming and failing. But there are 2-3 things that make this time the right time for quant investing. First is the availability and easy access to data. Today, you want any kind of data on any company that you want to research is available very easily, which was not possible, I would say, 5 years, 10 years down the line. And you had all these physical research reports coming and people had to scan through that. So that is the first thing, that today data availability is very easy. Secondly, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the whole advancement of tech will make the models more perfect. So finally, the reason why a quant model might fail, ultimately it's a mathematics formula, an algorithm, and I'm sure in the next session Parijat will be able to drive this point very clearly. So machine learning, mathematical models, algorithms, coupled with easy access of data and access of data across industries, across geographies, will make quant models easier. And thirdly, today, speed is important. Speed to decision, because the movements in the markets are very fast. That also is possible through quant investing. So I would say the time is right for quant investing. We're slowly moving towards passive funds. It'll be very difficult for active managers to beat the indices. And therefore, today is the right time for quant models to start emerging.
Right.
Yeah, just to add to what Shashi had just said, today the challenge with, and since we have, like even when the initially managed funds came, say like 20, 25 years back, this challenge was there that they were facing, trying to get the whole sense of how things will play out. But today, as we see, the struggle with every fund managers, is whether it's whichever strategy they are, is getting that alpha. And when you have the information being too over-researched, I'm saying the fundamental information, then how do you best use it? And probably I think so, quant is something which is really helping enhance that capability of us as a fund manager to build in that models and to enhance our ability to keep delivering that alpha over a much longer period of time and much more consistently, where the others might be still struggling that within that framework of stocks and ideas. And as you rightly said, there are so many events which keep happening. How do you navigate yourself through that? That becomes the biggest challenge, because every passing period, you will have those challenges. You'll never have a period where everything looks great and things. That's where this today is fitting very well. And I think so today this will keep increasing, and more strategies and fund houses will start adapting that in India. I think so globally, as I was discussing, Parijat, there's more than $1 trillion being managed under this particular strategy. But India is still at very nascent stage. So I think so this is a long way to go, and this will help navigate through the different phases of the market also.
Right. Yeah.
If I may add, actually.
Yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry. So the way I look at it is actually, in markets, they say there are 3 kinds of edges that you have. You can have an information edge,
right.
You can have an analytical edge, and you can have a behavioral edge. what has happened is, I think 15 years ago, information, just access to information of all kinds was still a very big deal. And so the most of the edge actually derived from them, where algos really don't have an edge. But when information dissemination becomes easier, where everybody's got access to the same information, then the edge comes from who can analyze it better, faster, and also on the behavior. So that's when the quant strategies can start adding differentiation. So, I mean, they might have worked in the past, but the incremental value from that would have been overshadowed by the access to information. Now, because the market has matured, quant will start playing a more important part.
Right. So my next question is from your answer only. So, like you said, there's a behavioral edge, and temperament and patience and a perseverance, kind of attitude has always shown that, portfolios build that way. And you hold through events. As long as the company is good, you make money. Okay, these are just common things that we keep hearing in the market. So what is the behavioral edge, we get with a quant style of investing? And with that question, we will probably, close the session for today, and we'll continue next week. But this is a very important question, because you mentioned, and behavioral edge is something which might come out better from a rule-based format of investing. So how do you think on the behavioral part, there's an edge when you look at quant-based strategies? So over to you.
Yeah. So I'll give an example, a concrete example, and I will use the momentum strategy as an example. So let's say you are a momentum investor, right? And you've built a portfolio, and you've had a rule that I will buy stocks. And the typical momentum strategy in quant world is actually you look at the 1 year performance of a stock. Let's say you've bought that stock, you've built that portfolio, and it's actually continuing to run. And in a discretionary setup, you could still be a momentum investor, of course, and you've bought these stocks. Somebody will come to you and he'll say, "Oh, but do you realize that the stock is now, it has never traded over 6 times book, and it is now trading at 9 times book and 10 times book." And what that will do to you is, sort of something like a Bajaj Finance that has been running, and somebody comes and says, "Oh, this is now at an all-time high price to book. Maybe you should sell." And you get this relentlessly, somebody is telling you, you might actually exit. But in a quant strategy, it's like, again, there is still that behavioral edge where you, as the manager of that strategy, you have to believe in the strategy. And you have to say, look, I run my system. Even today it is saying I should hold Bajaj Finance, then I will hold Bajaj Finance. I don't care what somebody else is saying. So there is still behavior, but it shifts from the decision on individual stocks and the individual stories that you will invariably hear around a company, right? Or it could be the other way also, that, oh, this one momentum tha, but ab ye dekho ye kharab hone wala hai. The CEO has changed, therefore you should exit. And very often, in fact, things that change will be for the better, but in a subjective world, you might sell. So instead of that behavior being, applied to individual stocks, it becomes simpler, and all you have to say is, no, I trust my strategy, right? So that edge, that thing still has to be there. But at least you're not taking decisions on 30, 40, 50 different stocks. You're just taking one big decision every day, which is saying, I still trust my strategy. I'm going to do what it says. And that is a superpower, actually.
So would you say that it helps you cut out noise?
Absolutely.
Right. So, so with this, we will probably close today's session, and we will come back for more on the 23rd, that's next Friday, and we'll delve deeper into how you actually make investment calls, and how the entire strategy works. So before I give my closing notes, if any of you wants to make some put some perspective or thought out there, most welcome. Otherwise, we'll just close for today.
I would only say, do join in for the next session. You will get the best quant product of the century. So do join in.
Right. So, I'm sure, audience on today's call really enjoyed this, and this has been a very participative audience. So thank you everybody for being on the call today. I hope all of you are keeping safe and are at home. And, we will connect again next Friday at the same time, 5:30, discuss more. And for any questions that you might have or any observations, you can mail, I'll just write down my mail ID, and you can mail them to us. We will try to take them the next time. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shashi. Thank you, Shishir. Thank you, Parijat. So again, we'll meet again next weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot.